Welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever wondered what happens when the darkest secrets we try to bury just refuse to stay hidden? Well, today, we're taking a deep dive into a really terrifying mystery. We're going to analyze the dark, totally waterlogged secrets of an abandoned boarding school. So, let's jump right into this chilling narrative because it brilliantly blurs the line between supernatural horror and an absolute psychological breakdown. Pain can wash away our sins. Okay, this chilling philosophy comes straight from the incredibly strict Sister Ruth, and it essentially sets the stage for the whole horrific cycle of abuse and supernatural vengeance that we're going to unravel today. She legitimately believed that suffering was the only path to purity. It's an absolutely twisted ideology, and as we'll see, it's one that her vulnerable students would eventually and violently turn right back against her. And that brings us to the core question driving this entire explainer. What happens when a forgotten childhood trauma returns to exact a deadly revenge? Repressed trauma is just such a powerful storytelling tool, mostly because it operates like a ticking time bomb inside the human mind. Honestly, the longer you push it down, the more explosive the inevitable detonation is going to be. We're going to track the clues of this wild whodunit together, piecing together a timeline of murder that culminates in a truly shocking psychological twist.
Section 1. The strict boarding school.
To really understand the bloody present, we have to look at the deeply scarred past. This timeline perfectly grounds our mystery. So, 18 years ago, a desperate group of teenage girls drowned Sister Ruth in a bathtub to protect a pregnant student. They thought they'd finally buried their monster, right? Well, fast forward to just weeks ago. The school's old water tank was inexplicably drained, which unwittingly freed a malevolent, long-dormant entity. And that brings us to the present day, where those surviving women are being systematically hunted down. It's wild to think how a desperate crime committed by teenagers almost 2 decades ago has rippled into a present-day bloodbath. The past never truly dies, does it?
So let's break down exactly what those dark secrets were. The whole thing started with Mary's forbidden pregnancy with a priest. When Sister Ruth discovered this undeniable transgression, she immediately applied her abusive, torturous methods of purification to punish the girls. To protect Mary's unborn baby, who, by the way, would grow up to be a girl named Eve, the friend group fought back. Murdering Sister Ruth in that bathtub was their absolute, desperate last resort. Afterward, they bound themselves together with a lifelong vow of silence, just desperately hoping the nightmare was over. Spoiler alert, it definitely wasn't.
Section 2. Fatal trip to Barcelona.
The nightmare violently collides with the present when Eve finds her mother, Mary, brutally murdered in her own home. And the number 18 hangs incredibly heavy over this entire story. 18 years have passed since that dark night at the school, and Eve herself is now exactly 18 years old. She's completely blocked out the traumatic memory of finding her mother's body. Her mind is fiercely protecting itself, so she only remembers a single terrifying figure dressed as a nun just standing over her in the shadows.
Driven by that immense grief and a deeply fractured memory, Eve heads to Barcelona. She's desperate for answers and reeling from the sudden loss of her mom, so she and her friends go looking for the old boarding school. She essentially needs to uncover the truth about her mother's mysterious past to somehow piece her own broken mind back together. And, naturally, ignoring the frantic warnings of the police, Eve's quest leads her directly into the epicenter of the danger. She ends up aligning her path with the remaining survivors of her mother's old friend group, who are, completely unknowingly, gathering for a really deadly reunion.
Section 3. The abandoned convent. The tension just skyrockets here as Eve and her friends finally locate the decaying, completely abandoned convent where the original crime went down. The narrative brilliantly isolates the characters, creating this overwhelming sense of creeping dread. I mean, think about it. They're stranded miles away from the nearest town. They have absolutely zero cellular network connection. Their rental vehicles are mysteriously disabled by the unseen entity. And to top it all off, they're trapped overnight in a pouring, relentless rainstorm. It creates a deeply claustrophobic situation where calling the police is impossible and escape is completely blocked by the storm. The trap has officially snapped shut.
Section 4. Sins and gruesome punishments. Trapped inside that dark, crumbling school, the group quickly realizes the entity hunting them is operating by a very specific, mercilessly gruesome set of rules. The killer's motive is directly tied to the twisted mythology of the boarding school itself. If we look at the victims, a horrific pattern emerges. Mary's supposed sin was her forbidden pregnancy, right? Well, her throat was slit, which perfectly mirrors the martyrdom of St. Mary. Eulalia was burned alive, mirroring Saint Eulalia. Christie, who was punished for hiding the truth, had her hands brutally severed. This killer isn't just mindlessly slashing, they are executing a highly calculated, ritualistic purification, punishing each woman according to the specific martyrdom of their namesake saints. She is purifying them, punishment and regret, through pain. As that horrific pattern solidifies, this chilling realization sets in. The desperate survivors realize that Sister Ruth's twisted mission from 18 years ago didn't end with her physical death in that bathtub. Instead, it simply evolved into something deeply terrifying and, honestly, seemingly supernatural.
Section 5. Trapping the Water Spirit.
Discovering that the nun travels exclusively through water, the desperate survivors devise a highly risky plan to fight back. To do this, they have to exploit the entity's fundamental supernatural limitation, which is the water conduit. Because Sister Ruth was violently drowned in a bathtub, her spirit is permanently bound to water. This limitation requires the vengeful entity to use pools, pipes, and the pouring rain to actually manifest in the physical world. It explains exactly why the murders only started after that old water tank was drained, and why the entity attacks with such intense ferocity during rainstorms. Crucially, it means if the survivors can somehow control the water, they might just be able to trap the killer. So their survival absolutely hinges on this flawed but deeply desperate trap. First, they rush to shut off all the secondary water valves so the entity has nowhere else to travel. Next, they attempt to lure the entity up to the main, top-floor water tank, and finally, they plan to use the building's main power to electrocute the tank once the entity is trapped inside. Now, their strategy to force the demon into a single, highly electrified location is brilliant in theory, but executing that in a terrifying, flooded building? Yeah. That's another story entirely. Unsurprisingly, the trap fails catastrophically. The water levels rise way too quickly, absolute panic sets in, and the electrical system shorts out in a massive shower of sparks. This failure leaves the remaining survivors completely scattered in the pitch-black darkness, totally disoriented, and entirely defenseless against the approaching killer. The sheer terror of being plunged into complete darkness with a water-bound demon creeping through the pipes adds this suffocating layer of dread, and with their one viable defense completely ruined, the narrative masterfully drops its biggest clues right before the ultimate revelation.
Section 6. The shocking final twist.
Just as all hope seems lost in the flooded, decaying convent, the pieces of our intricate whodunit finally click together to reveal a horrifying truth, and it all comes down to the ultimate question. Who is the real killer hunting their survivors? Well, if you've been paying close attention to this explainer, specifically focusing on Eve's blocked childhood memories, her mysterious blackouts, and her constant, undeniable proximity to the water-based attacks, you might have already pieced together the devastating truth.
Throughout the entire narrative, we're presented with a really stark contrast. On one hand, we have innocent Eve, the grieving daughter with amnesia, desperately seeking the truth about her mother's past. On the other hand, we have the vengeful nun, a demonic force executing brutal, highly calculated punishments through water. The story brilliantly weaves these two seemingly disparate figures throughout the plot, carefully leading us right to the mind-bending reveal that they are, in fact, the exact same person.
Yeah, the horrifying truth is that Eve's psyche fractured completely the night she witnessed her mother's brutal murder. This actively allowed the vengeful spirit of Sister Ruth to possess her and carry out the killings. The profound trauma of her childhood caused Eve's mind to entirely block out the truth of what she saw and what she was doing. Because her mind was so deeply broken and vulnerable, she became the perfect, unwitting vessel for Sister Ruth's dark aquatic revenge. The tragedy is just immense here. Eve was the one committing the grisly murders all along, her own hands acting out the horrific will of the dead nun she feared the most.
And this brilliant psychological twist leaves us with one final, deeply lingering question. Was it truly a supernatural possession, or was it entirely the devastating revenge of a fractured mind? I mean, did Sister Ruth's ghost really use the water to possess Eve's body? Or did the horrific trauma of her childhood simply cause Eve to suffer a severe psychotic break, tragically taking on the persona of her mother's greatest fear to somehow process the grief? It masterfully challenges us to decide where the supernatural ends and the profound terror of human trauma truly begins. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Let that question sink in and keep analyzing.